Welcome everybody to the research series. This is terrific. Welcome to those joining online. Thank you for kicking us off today. This is terrific. So what I'll do is just, briefly tell you a little bit about you, if that's okay, not long. And then from there, we'll typically, as usual, turn it over to you for the first half thereabouts, and then we'll have a nice discussion to follow. So Marylis Fantoni is a PhD candidate at O'Neill, where her focus is policy implementation. Her research explores citizen interactions with the government in a variety of settings, including her native country of Brazil. She's interested in topics related to gender representation and administrative burden. Many of those happening around here at IU, as we were just saying before this series as well. So today she's going to be talking to us about a really fascinating research, global reports around women suffering sexual intimate partner violence, the role different online tools can play in helping to kind of break down some of those institutional barriers and make sure that those get reported as frequently as possible and dealt with by the authorities. So thank you so much for being here, for kicking us off on this important topic, and the floor is yours.
Thank you for having me and offering me such a great place to present my research.
Well, then being first up, I say.
So this is my first chapter of my dissertation. It's called At Their Fingertips: What is the impact of online reporting of domestic violence? This is my plan B for my job talk. Ideally, I want my second chapter to be my job talk, but if I'm in the middle of data collection right now, so if that doesn't happen, this is going to be my job talk. So today, I'd like you to imagine that I'm interviewing here for a position. So let's, pretend that this is a job talk, and I would love any feedback on the research as well. But this is already in print, so there's a little bit that I could change on the research itself. But I would welcome all comments, of course, but specifically in terms of like presenting as if this was a talk. So yeah. So as I mentioned, PhD candidate at SPIA, Indiana, and I'm very happy to talk about this research today. Did that not work? Is it not working now? Oh, maybe you have to. Can you click on the thing?
It looks like
Yeah, just
which
click on that.
screen. Okay.
Yeah, just on the PDF to understand to move it.
Oh, there it goes.
Okay. So today, before I dive into this specific paper, I just want to briefly talk to you about my research agenda, sort of like my interests and where this paper fits in the whole of my goals, short and long term as a scholar. And then we're going to go just originally like introduction, theory, data, methods, results, conclusion, and if we have time towards the end, some Q&A. So happy to have questions throughout in terms of the Okay, so some of my key areas of interest, they lie in, of course, domestic violence, understanding and fostering reporting of domestic violence specifically. I also have some work on Medicaid postpartum coverage, understanding how that impacts postpartum women in the long run. I'm also looking at ethics and corruption, trying to identify best practices to curb corruption on specifically public service. I'm interested in government, understanding and investigating what are the consequences, maybe sometimes unintended ones, of government digitalization. Representative bureaucracy is a literature that I'm also very interested in. I'm trying to understand if we have a public service that looks like the citizens, what does that happen? And specifically looking from the passive to the active representation jump. And then administrative burden, of course. And in administrative burden, I'm going to look more at psychological costs. And I'm going to go over those in a minute on this paper. But if I were to summarize all that I've said right now, I would say that my short and long-term goals as a scholar would be to understand how to better deliver public services, in a way to both improve quality of life and decrease inequities. And I tend to do that with the lenses toward gender. So this paper specifically is going to touch on domestic violence. But most of my research, whether it's in representation, it looks at gender and race to some extent as well. Today, topic that I'm going to talk about, and I would like to open with this quote: "Whether at home, on the streets, or during war, violence against women and girls is a human rights violation of pandemic proportions that takes place in public and private spaces." And World Health Organization shows data that 1 in 3 women have suffered sexual or physical violence. They have been in some sort of unhealthy domestic violence situation with their husbands, their intimate partners, and it's truly a worldwide problem and one that it's very current, unfortunately. I'm gonna look at Brazil specifically here, and during COVID, domestic violence became an even more salient issue. So that's true for most places that because of lockdown, because people had stressors, they were inside their homes, women did not have their support networks, domestic violence went up. It just rose exponentially. And specifically in the city that I look, Rio de Janeiro, there was an increase of 50% for hotline calls just the first weekend of lockdown. And so public authorities start to realize this is going to be bad. We're trying to prevent, spreading of the disease, but then we're also having this other issue that is just, like riding along with the pandemic. So what they did in Rio is that the state court created this online tool where women could report and request protective orders online. So prior to that, they would have to go to a police station and talk to a cop there, and then the cop would request a protective order. But now they can do it online instead. This was implemented in December of 2020 in the capital city of Rio and spread statewide in March of 2022. This is what it looks like. So victims will go in. It's really a Google form. They go in, they fill out their information. They can put videos or recordings or pictures if they want to. If they don't want, they don't have to. And then they generate like a protective order PDF sort of thing with a number. It goes to the judge right away, and then the judge has 48 hours according to law to either grant it or not, and then trigger a whole network of systems and help and services that women could get. And so before that, you have to go to the police, and that would add up some time to the process, which for somebody under a domestic violence situation, it could be potentially fatal depending on the situation as well. So in a nutshell, this is what this publication did, called Maria da Penha Virtual. So the research question that I'm looking at here is pretty straightforward. So what is the impact of bypassing police contact by offering the possibility of online domestic violence? This is what I'm going to investigate. We know from empirical evidence that the interaction with the police when it comes to domestic violence reporting is not the best for women. We see that police officers do not offer adequate assistance to victims. They tend to be hostile, sometimes blaming women. There are qualitative work showing that they ask, but what did you do for your husband? We see that victims fear victimization by the police, so they have a lack of trust, so they don't even want to go there in the first place. And that's been all shown by other work. And most important, if you have had a negative experience in the past, you don't want to go to the police back again in the future. So we know from the literature that police interactions when it comes to domestic violence and sexual harassments are not the best situations, and that women tend to avoid those. In Brazil specifically, chronic underreporting is a major concern. It's true in the US as well. So out of the violent crimes, the most underreported is domestic violence and sexual harassment. About 47% of women report it. But in Brazil, that number is even worse. There was a nationwide 2023 report showing that only 29% of victims report domestic violence to the police.
Because how do they measure that?
Sorry?
How do they measure underreporting?
Yeah, I'll show you here. So they're asking in the report, like, why are you not reporting your partner or whatever happened? 21% said they did not. The police could offer a solution. 13% said they did not have evidence, so they think that their word was not going to be believed. 13% said they were afraid of retaliation, and 11% said that they simply did not want to involve the police.
Okay, sorry, but it's a clarification question. So how do they know of a case of domestic violence it has not been reported?
Oh, it's a survey. So this is a national crime victimization survey. So they asked, have you suffered this and this in the past 12 months? And then the person will say yes, no. And then if yes, they keep asking questions. And then this report is interesting because it even asks, like, did you tell to other institutions? So like church, I don't know, like a psychological clinic or something like that, or family, and people tend to rely more on those like some of extra official or other institutions rather than the police or the judiciary system. So yeah, I'm gonna look at the administrative burden literature. Those are the lenses that I'm using to analyze this issue. And the administrative burden literature says that it investigates whenever there's an onerous interaction between citizens and public service delivery. That's what we call administrative burden. There are three types of costs that this literature says that people incur when trying to access a public service. The first is learning. So how long does it take you to learn about a specific program? Do you have to go on a website? Do you have to call people? Like the time that you sort of like lose in that process. Compliance costs, they have to do with what sort of evidence do you have to submit in order to qualify for a public service. So do you have to fill this form and then you have to go home and get more documents and all of that? And then psychological, and the one that I'm looking at here, is what are the emotions that arise when you're trying to access that public service? So a lot of this literature looks at stigma. So for example, if you are a SNAP beneficiary, you know, do you feel like you're less than? Do you feel like, you know, people are looking at you and you're ashamed of, you know, like using that card on the store or something like that? But in my case, and in this specific work that I'm proposing here, I'm going to look at fear as one of the components, you know, like so when women are doing their cost benefit analysis of should I report? Should I not report? I think that there's a lot of like negative emotions that go through with fear, with lack of trust in the institutions, maybe some ideas that like even if I do report, nothing's gonna happen, or you know, I think we're all like in the psychological cost sort of like sphere. And so this is the narrative that I'm using here for this paper. So I say that reporting domestic violence is highly burdensome. You have to go in, you stay there for hours, you have to tell your story to a cop that is going to maybe harass you, specifically in the Brazilian context where police is very entangled with militia as well. So the women will experience those psychological costs and negative emotions along the way. And then I say that the process of reporting domestic violence might prevent women from doing it in the first place. And so I believe that this online tool can reduce the psychological cost of reporting, because now you can do it from your phone, from the safety of your house. You don't have to look at a cop's face, and you know, you feel safer. This is what I'm going to contend here. And so specifically, by lowering psychological costs through online domestic violence reporting, I expect that there will be an increase in the number of protective orders requested, as well as an increase in the number of protective orders granted. One thing is you applying or requesting the order and then the judge saying a yes or no to that. But I expect an increase in both. And then I expect a decrease in the number of police station reporting. I think there's going to be a substitution effect and to go towards online reporting instead of the police station. So those are sort of like my hypotheses, if you will. So the way that I'm going to measure that is with two data sets. These are data sets that I entered data use agreements with these organizations. They're not public access. So one comes from the judiciary data set from the Rio de Janeiro Supreme Court. The other one is a police data set from the Institute of Public Safety of Rio de Janeiro as well. From the judiciary one, I'm looking at the number of protective orders granted and requested. And from the police one is the number of domestic violence reports filed at stations statewide. All my
Clarification, the number of protective orders requested is for both, no matter which source was coming,
Yes.
police or, okay.
Yes, all sources. Exactly.
I have a question too, but would you want them while you're presenting, or you tell me?
Yeah, go ahead.
I'm worried, are you gonna be required to do an IRB, and have you?
I did.
They approved, because this is got no difference between someone in the home with the domestic violence alleged perpetrator. So if you get protective order granted what happens?
So there are 9 or 8 types of protective orders that they can request, and the victims are the ones requesting it.
Yeah, but they're still there with the abuser.
Yes, yes. So, and they range from the abuser have to be separated, they cannot have a firearm.
How's that gonna happen? I filled in a form and it's granted. What's about ready to happen?
So what happens is, you fill the form, you request it, right? And this is all part of, it's all the judiciary system.
Yeah. But if I'm standing in the police station, I'm okay. Even if the police officers are complete assholes, which they tend to be,
Yeah.
I'm still okay.
So
I'm
what-
not in my living room. With him there.
So what happens is,
Him or
so
her.
you fill the form, goes to the judge. Judge has 48 hours to grant it or not.
Yep.
Then it has to be served to the abuser. And that's true even with the police station. So in rare cases where there is an actual threat to somebody's life, women can be whisked away from the police station to a shelter.
Yeah.
That could be a case.
Yeah.
But then the abuser still has to be served.
So
So,
if you're not in the same house anymore.
yes, true. Yeah, but in reality, so in terms of IRB, I'm not doing any intervention here. I'm just analyzing their data. That's what it is. So the judiciary implemented that online tool. So it's already up and running. The only thing that I'm doing here is like analyze the data, and it's all de-identified. So, and again, this, let me just,
I'm not worried. I mean, in the rare instance that I'm not worried about the identification. I'm more worried about the police show up and as they're walking up the front walk, she's literally getting her ass kicked. You know,
it could happen. It could happen. It could happen. And
if I was you, I'd keep an eye on that part of this metric too, right? Because this system looks great and I love technology and I would love to connect you to some people in an hour who are doing tons of access to justice issues, technology including. That system is very worrisome to me.
I understand. And I will say, I don't have data to back up this.
It's dreadful in the United States too, by the way. I mean, we have the number. He finds out, we're still there. Where the hell are you gonna go? Or you have a cat and a dog and kids, and they can't all go to the shelter. This, I don't think fixes that. So I would also measure that since you're getting the data anyway. How often it results in the protective order no longer being necessary, or the person withdrawing the request,
Or retaliation.
or the
even.
retaliation.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, you're right. I think if you are in the police station and it's like real high threat, but then again, the cop has to say, this is a really high threat, I'm moving you to a shelter, which
Absolutely.
you have holes in that portion as
Absolutely.
well. But for most cases, even if you go to the police station, you go back home and then he's gonna be served the order anyways, and then you might still be there, even with the police station.
Yeah, but part of me is worried about the trust created where I think I'm submitting this online form and it doesn't feel the same. It feels like there's anonymity, there's all kinds of things that feel different than the importance of sitting in a police station and realizing this is the moment. And you would protect yourself differently if you walked into a police station and realized this is the moment versus filling in an online form.
We're gonna take a look at that.
Yeah, I would keep an eye on it, because my guess is these outcomes are gonna be amazing. You're gonna see more increases, but the consequence of seeing more reporting can also be further erosion of trust of a new system that now has just made it even worse because people haven't thought about this being the moment.
And there is some issue with trust that I'm gonna come
Yeah.
back to, and you're right on it, that there's holes in this entire chain of events for sure.
Cool.
So just to clarify, I don't follow any one person or any one protective order. I see the monthly requests or, the number of protective orders granted on a city level. And then my outcomes are gonna be the monthly rate of each one of those dependent variables that I mentioned per 100,000 residents. Because my treated city is much larger than my control city, so I need to make it a rate. The time frame of the analysis runs from January of 2019 to February of 2022, even though I have data that goes a little bit further, but that's because of my method of choice. So I'm gonna use what is called a synthetic control method. It's a strategy where we can estimate causal effects by weighing potential control donors and creating a counterfactual. I don't know how much to go into the method itself, so I might have extended a little bit. Tell me later. So these are the key components to run this model. You need a treatment group with an intervention, which is the capital city of Rio. The intervention is, of course, the online implementation. Then you need a control group without intervention. My control here are the surrounding cities in the state, 81. And so like the map here, treated city, and then all of my control cities surrounding it. And then you need the pre and post measures of the outcome of interest. My pre is gonna run January 2019, November of 2020, and post is gonna go December 2020, February of 2022. So the way to run a synthetic control method is that you look at all your data, you plot your outcome of interest. And you look if there is a combination of control units that make up, that are somewhat following closely your treated unit. So in here, we have city, the treated city in black. So let's say this is the number of protective orders requested. And then my gray are all the possible controls, all the cities throughout the state. And then when you find those, you weigh them. So the ones that are closest to my treated, they will receive higher weights. And then by using those that receive higher weights, so those like the more, it's like the bolded lines are the ones that were those weighted, and then we create a prediction. So the prediction is you take all of them and you create sort of like a counterfactual of what would have happened if there was no intervention. And so the dotted one are the ones with the counterfactual. So and the idea is like the treatment never happened. This is what it should have looked like. And then what you do is that you compare the difference between the counterfactual with your actual treated city that received the intervention, and that gap right there, that difference, that's the average treatment effect on the treated or my ATT. This is what I'm looking at here. Again, the idea here is that we have some assumptions. We believe that the data comes from a structure, but that there are different loadings on the common factor. So sort of like domestic violence happens everywhere. Each city is going to have sort of like different importance or different ideas, and we want to match on the outcome. If we match on the outcome, we're matching on the delta as well. And so you need some assumptions for this model to hold, right? Conditional independence. We want to believe that treatment is as good as randomly assigned. Structure stability. The data generating process is the same in the pre and post period. And then we don't want any factors that will wake up, sort of like elections and such. And so you can ask, but COVID was the main thing. But COVID was picked up in the pre and the post, so like it didn't wake up. But also it happened both for the treated and the control cities. So COVID is not really a problem here to violate this assumption.
And then you can keep collecting data and get data for the period in which they extended to the whole state of Rio de Janeiro, and then see if things converge.
I can, yes. The only problem is that when the states adopted, the whole state adopted, is that I lose sort of my control. So I could do that maybe not on a causal estimate way. So yeah.
Of an idea.
But it changes. When the state adopts, there's a huge spike. So the numbers go up as well. It's been very, very successful. And so we have some descriptive statistics here. So this is like not looking at anything causally, just like what's the story here. And then when we look at the pre and post period for the protective orders requested, the first variable, in the treated city, there is an increase of 37% of requests. Control cities goes down by 12.5, sort of what you expect, right? Protective orders granted, you see an increase in both treated and control. And then reports at police stations, you see a tiny decrease in the treated city and in the control cities. But again, there's a muted variable bias, and this is not. This is just we're looking at a trend here. If I want to come to a causal conclusion, we need to use a method such as the synthetic control. And so there's also a concern with denial rate. When we look at the results, we're going to know why this matters. The denial rate actually is going up, meaning the number of protective orders that you receive and that the judges say no. Yes. In the treated city, in the pre-period, 39% of protective orders were denied. In the post-period, 48% denied. Control cities, same trend. 48% were denied in the pre-period, 55% were denied. And I'm pretty sure we're going to discuss that.
Yeah.
So for my results, this is what I find in terms of protective orders requested. So there is a 30% increase from baseline levels of protective orders request when we look at it. So this specific intervention, this online tool, means that about 337 new protective orders are requested monthly in my treated city. For this method, we use placebo randomization, which gives me a low p-value, which is just essentially saying these are all the controls. Let's pretend that the controls also have the intervention, plot them, and then look at the treated and look at the effect. Then go back and look at the actual treated city. How rare is my outcome? And it's very rare, so it's not by chance.
Are you just matching based on the outcome variable or?
Yes, you mentioned the outcome variable. Exactly.
So other like on variables like population or?
You don't need any of that. When you're doing a synthetic control, you're matching on the outcome variable because of the assumption that if you match on the outcome variable, you're also matching on the coefficients as well.
So if you were to plot out like a unit mix table, you're just gonna have a variable number for the synthetic, real, and the real, and you're just assuming that the synthetic real is close enough to the real.
So the
outcome.
synthetic prediction is the counterfactual. If the intervention hadn't happened, this is what my treated city would look like. It's the counterfactual. It's like it creates so that line doesn't exist, so to say, but it creates like a counterfactual. And then the difference between now here is the intervention and the counterfactual, that's the ATT, and that's what we see. And this is like, see how unusual it is compared to all the other controls. And so that's saying those requests that we're seeing, that 30% is not by chance, it's because of the intervention itself. But now when we go look at protective orders granted, I get an ATT of 1.25 per 100,000. That's an 11% increase, and my p-value is high. And so not rejecting the number. Same thing for the police station reporting. And actually this is in the different direction that I hypothesized first. It would say that it actually increased by 5%. But both of my p-values are not statistically significant. And so I'm not being able to reject the null here, as you can see in those small plots over here. So what does that mean? The next slide. It means that the way that I read it, there could be a broken chain of events, that will lead to both pros and cons of using this system. Let's go through them. So the cons is what happens to women who request a protective order and are turned down. So now you just use the system. For some reason, the system failed you. And you're gonna go back to the system. It could increase a lack of trust in the system as well. I believe that there are institutional constraints or broken chain of actions. And let me tell you why. This system, there's sort of like an on-call, if you report and request during normal business hours, it's gonna go to your jurisdiction judge. To do it after business hours or on the weekend, it's sort of like a roster of an on-call judge. And we know that domestic violence cases will happen mostly at night or weekends and all of that. And so that on-call judge could be a judge that has nothing to do with family, that doesn't understand domestic violence. And then if they read a report where they're like, no, this is not domestic violence, they will go and they will deny it. So I think there could be an institutional issue here. And so the idea would be, if the city is to implement a program like this, they need to make sure that they have all their ducks in a row so that things like this don't happen. And so you need to have systems in place to guarantee the safety of the victims. It is the role of the judge to read that protective order and trigger the system. If it's a shelter, if it's sort of a week, a tenth, a social rent where they can get 6 months of their rent paid, if it is something to do with the children, and so it's the role of the judge to do all that. And so sometimes that could be lacking as well. And I think this is one of the most interesting theorizing portions. Again, I don't have anything to measure this, but initially I thought that quality of reporting was going to go up. Because at first, a cop would write on a report. And I thought that in cases, for example, if it's a psychological threat or, like if it's not physical, maybe they could downplay it. And then I thought that maybe with women writing in their own words, quality was gonna go up. But there's a question here as to maybe it could be going down because they don't know the jargon. Again, it's a judge that is reading that. And like, if women don't know what to say or what to write, and usually you're in a place of distress if you're requesting a protective order, right? There's a lot of like socioeconomic status that goes into domestic violence and reporting as well. And so it could be the case that quality is going down. There's also like between talking to judges and people who work frontline workers there, sometimes women will use the system to request something that it really is not a domestic violence. It's like a divorce issue, or it's a kids issue. Who is gonna get the kid, or it's alimony, but it's not specifically related to violence. So quality could be going down, and this is why we're seeing that even though women are requesting, they're getting turned down. So the requests are not turning into actual protective orders granted. But I think there are pros in the system as well. I think reporting, the act of reporting on their phone even can trigger other self-help behaviors, and literature has shown that once like sort of come to terms with it and you decide to make a choice and do something, you can then, I don't know, go talk to a friend, or you can go and call a hotline, or try to do other things that will help you. I think reporting in and of itself has merit, because ideally, societally, you could have more data and more information about where domestic violence is more prevalent. You could understand it better and use it for, public policy adjustments and all of that. And I also think individually it has merit, because if in the future something happens, you need a proof of something, you're disputing in court or whatever, and then individually you still have your record of that, I think it could still be potentially helpful. I think now looking at the intervention itself, I think it's an interesting case of a policy success, because I think it has had high take up with minimal advertising. This was during the pandemic, so there was some Facebook or Instagram from some of the institutions itself, but there was not like a huge advertising. And there was a high take up of 30%. It's easy to implement. It's a low cost solution. I think that the major cost is making sure that the judiciary system is on board with it, and making sure that it runs smooth. And the idea here is that it might bring new people to the door. People who were not comfortable reporting at police stations maybe now are finding this to be a different means that they can use. People who would not go to a police station can do that. But again, there's a lot to think about. The impact of this policy. Overall, looking at it, I think it makes a theoretical contribution to the e-government literature. There's a lot of scholars within public administration, and I'm sure outside of my field, are looking at what happens when we digitalize a government service. Is it good? Is it bad? And for whom? And so I think this one adds to that evidence that, at least in this case, when we're looking at domestic violence, it has been positive. At least women were quick to jump into it and make use of it. And I also feel like understanding the channels of public service delivery has come value here. Potentially in a situation like this where you can try and curb violence escalation. But again, it's the way that I see it, it's a chain of events. And if they're broken, like if the judge doesn't give you the order, if the order is not served, if the police, doesn't make sure that they are safe and they're in a shelter or something like that, it could very much, collapse. But I think like this is one of the first ones. And then remember, go back to that statistic. Only 29% of women report domestic violence. And I think if we can get them through the door, then it's up to the institutions to do their work and, to help those women and to protect them. And with that, I'll just leave this last quote as well. Stopping the violence cycle and preventing further victimization of women through local policies is an urgent and globally relevant topic that deserves not only attention, but also empirically rigorous research pointing to successful interventions. And that's what I've tried to do here. So thank you very much. And I would love to hear your comments.
Britt is joining online, so feel free, Britt, if you wanted to jump in at some point, but Yeah, otherwise the floor is open, guys. Quick one, let's do James first, yeah, let's do you guys then, yeah, James, go ahead, kick us off. This is great.
So yeah, I was just curious, and maybe this goes to sort of the denial versus acceptance question. I was kind of wondering what the subjective opinion of judges was about this policy change. Are they thinking a certain request is more legitimate if it originates from a physical source rather than through the online method? Are they, just anecdotally seeing a difference in the quality of these applications through because of the online tool? So I don't know if there's an answer to that, but that was sort of something that I was thinking.
Yeah, so last summer, I was in Brazil and I spent some time interviewing them. I interviewed the judge who actually implemented this. And I think it depends on like with whom you talk. So for the judge who implemented this, so they have like sort of like a female branch inside there, and it's their group that, sort of like got this up and running. She loves the tool and she utilizes it very much, and she tries to spread it a lot, and she thinks it's great. But she also gave me some anecdotal evidence of like this woman applied and it was actually alimony. It was not domestic violence related, and so for those cases they would deny. The issue with domestic violence in Brazil is that there's a law that codifies a lot of things, but not what constitutes domestic violence. So it's very discretionary. So it depends on the judge. So like, is a slap domestic violence or is a punch domestic violence? That is up to the judge. I mean, it will say like physical, sexual, financial, but like what in that's very prone to an interpretation. The judge who's reading it. For the future, once in my job and trying to get tenure, I will try to access notes of those decisions. But that's gonna be a pain of a job, but I wanna do it because I wanna read what they're saying when they deny something, like what is the reasoning? And I wanna do some qualitative work on there just to sort of like understand what triggers a denial. I will say this, most of the judges that I talk to, and I only talk to female judges, so they say we'll always grant a protective order. We like to err on the side of caution, instead of, like if it's a fake or, then you can go through, all the legal system and take it back. But I don't think that's the case for most judges, and specifically the judges who are on call and seeing those requests on weekends or late at night. I think they don't share that point of view.
Just a very minor point. Or you might have done this in actual paper. Do you see the RMSPE bar chart and then actually see that if you go back to the placebo in space slide, I just wonder what that the placebo line that goes way down. Do you know what that state is? Like,
It's one of the cities. There's a lot of noise. That's the reality. And I think
I mean, looking at the divergence and the ratio of divergence, placebo and space tests, look at it, it looks great. It looks promising. It's great, but I was just wondering, for Rio de Janeiro, is the RMSPE bigger than all of the other
so
placebo?
what the synthetic control is gonna use is a Cohen's d measure. So the Cohen's d measure is sort of like how far or how close they are. And the number that we use is 0.25. If you are within 0.25, we're saying you have a good match.
Yeah.
To speak, and if I'm not mistaken, this is like 0.25, 0.24, 0.23, something like that. So like they are close, but again, it's noisy. This is the orders requested, right? Yes. Some cities, I'm not even surprised if there's some measurement error, like some really bad measurement error in there as well.
Do you see that states that receive the positive weights are like right around there?
Yes, I'll show you. I have a map of that. Oh, sorry, this is gonna take them up there. So this is the treated city, as I told you. Wow, this is all pixely. It's good to see how it's that on a big screen. Yeah, everything that has dots. So they receive some sort of weight. Now, this is like all the cities who received weight, not for a specific variable. So some might have, and then if you wanna look at specifically, like, these are the name of the towns, it's not gonna make any sense to you guys. But then you have this, like, the share of weights that each one of them received. We would be concerned if one town was receiving like a whole lot of weight, but that doesn't seem to be the case. They sort of like, it's sort of like evenly. And I think it's an average of like 17 or 20, something like that, out of all of them who received some sort of weight. But with synthetic control, the weights changed into each period. And so what I'm showing you here is the weight in the first prediction and the weight for the last prediction for each month afterwards. And it's also reassuring to see that there's not like a huge difference on a monthly basis for which cities are receiving the share of the weight. But yeah, and I think it's interesting that I would choose, so the synthetic control was created as a way so that you could use data instead of subjectively choosing a case study, and a bit about that. But if I were picking other cities as case study, I would definitely be picking like the main ones here, you know, the coastal ones, the ones that are close to the city that have sort of like same systems, you know. Some of them are a bit of surprise, like that one up there. I probably would not have, but like this is one of the largest ones, you know, from the countryside. So it sort of aligns really well with if I were choosing it by knowing the state, those that received the weights.
So yeah, Gustavo, then Angie, and then I'll.
So I was thinking about, so first of all, interpretation and then potential ways of distinguishing different interpretations, no? Because you are getting non-results for granted POs, no? So essentially it's like there is no effect, no significant effect on granted protective orders, but you are seeing a rise in request, essentially, no? So essentially, so overall, I would say, if I have to evaluate this policy in isolation, I would say this is bad. This is a bad policy, no? Because essentially you are increasing the noise ratio. So if you are reducing the signal to noise ratio of this system, essentially you have more reporting for the same level of final outcome. So in isolation, it's kind of bad, I would say. So now comes the potential explanation. So one potential explanation is, well, the police was doing a very good job doing screening. So now you are getting a lot of cases that, given the law and given how the judges interpret the law, they are not considered domestic violence. And you can discuss that. Maybe the law is bad, maybe the judges have different training, but that means that this policy doesn't affect what is the binding constraint in this problem, okay? The second potential interpretation, so essentially is that, well, maybe it's kind of going the same direction. It's trying to distinguish what is the real binding constraint there. No? So it's so is it an issue that essentially the police was doing a good job screening or not? Or is it an issue, like you mentioned, that different groups of judges are getting these reports? That's a very different thing, because the police interventions that those different mechanisms call are very different, no? So if it's just the law, you need to go to the legislature so to change the law. If they are judges overall, then you need to retrain judges or whatever, change something there, okay, in the judicial system. If we are talking just of, hey, this particular type of judges are getting this over the weekends, that's a very different type of policy, no? And then if it's something about the police doing bad or good screening, again, so you need to do an intervention at the police level. So in some sense, this is a non-result that calls for finding what is the real binding issue here, no? So essentially. And then under the implicit assumption that, so you want more granted POs because you assume that there are real cases of domestic violence that didn't get to the final outcome of a granted PO, no? So that's the implicit assumption. So somebody can say, maybe that's false, no? Maybe that's false. Given the law, it's false, no? So the judges are correctly interpreting the law. There is no zero ideological bias on the judges. The police is doing a good screening thing. It's like, just given the law, you get to the PO all the cases that are above the threshold that the law established. We suspect that that's not the case. Well, why? So essentially, you know? So that would be my direct follow-up on this, no?
No, I agree with everything, and all that I'm hearing is switch agenda. So
Yeah.
like
Yeah.
next steps, things to do next, and I'm definitely in line with you. And again, I think the intervention itself. So if we look at creating an app, I think that's positive. I think where it's lost is the institutional side of it that needs some adjustment. And we need to find out what the mechanism is. And I definitely agree with you. And I see that as a combination of like talking to people, doing some more qualitative work, like reading data if I can get access to them. And I'm also very interested in looking into that. Thank you.
So I think mine follows up on that sort of, in that, what are you hoping to, what's your primary thesis that's gonna be you're gonna focus on? I agree with Gustavo, there's like 1,000 things in here, all of which you could pull on each of the threads. And if you pull on the wrong thread and don't contemplate the complexity of the impact of other threads, you're not doing whatever you probably want to do. So what is your, like, I'm gonna use this. This is the question I want to answer.
So on a broader level, I'm interested in the citizen perspective. So I'm interested in how the women feel they report and what sort of policy can trigger or help them feel more comfortable with the reporting itself.
But your research isn't gathering that information.
Yeah, not on this chapter, no. So the idea is for subsequent chapters to, dive a little bit more deeply into that. So this is like sort of the introduction to what it's chapter 1. We have this intervention. Seems to work, at least from the take up on women, from the victims itself. Now we need to go a little bit deeper and talk to them and take a look at like what's really, food. There's a side of it that wants to go the institutional route. And as I said, like request all of like those judges knows, the interview judges understand really what's going on as well. At first, and right now for the dissertation, I'm mostly interested in looking at it from the perspective of the victim. How do you feel about it? Has this intervention helped you? Does it help counteract potentially the fear or, the lack of trust that you might have in the police institution? That's what I'm looking at currently. But I agree with you that there are a number of things could be looked at in here.
Okay, so if you were you're talking about chapters in a PhD, so what are the chapters of your PhD? What's the first? What's 2? What's 3?
Yes.
Yeah, tell me the. I
Yeah.
think we can all help you with this, right? Because all of us have been, almost all of us, I guess, or maybe all of us will admit to being at this exact same spot. You've got this big, really cool thing, and ultimately you have to produce a PhD in a time that is you're excited about. This is like your whole career. I mean, this is the start of your whole career. You can't do your whole career in a PhD. So one of the things we tend to be really good at is, hold on, here's the path to walk down, to check the boxes, and then go do a whole lot of cool stuff in here. So can you, in your head, what is that progression right now?
So second chapter, I know the ordering there, right? So
Okay.
one of the chapters, qualitative work, the victims themselves, understanding
Do
specific.
what you just spoke about.
Yeah, talking to them, yes, understanding, talking to them, like, and just talking generally, like, what are the things that you feel and like getting to the emotions itself of fear and all of that and understanding how this tool has helped or not. And then the third chapter, the idea is to run an experiment. This policy, again, was stated, was implemented statewide. There's been a while. There's a pending law that says that the tool should be advertised statewide. The state government needs to put money into advertise, like in schools, in buses, in hospitals, and all of that. Hasn't passed yet. And so my idea with the experiment is try to see what type of language increases the likelihood of somebody using the tool. And so there's been a number of experiments in the administration that sort of follows this idea, which is like put in just a public service announcement, baseline message, and then you do a public service announcement, baseline message plus something. And you see if that has some sort of like reasoning with your audience, with people that want to click. In this case here would be with the woman who suffered domestic violence. And so what the idea here is, if we announce the tool, if we advertise it, and we add languages that touch on fear, that touch on lack of trust, you're more likely to get a response from women. I'm gonna measure that through an experiment on Facebook and Instagram. So they see an ad, those Facebook and Instagram ads. Yeah, some see the baseline message, some see the message with language of fear and lack of trust. So if there's a difference in the click-through rate.
So what connects those is overview. Number two, you're double checking fear and the others, you're replicating some of the other studies to double check fear of police and fear of retaliation exists in this current population at this current time. The third one is to take that findings, tailor advertising specifically to.
So ideally, I would love that to inform once they are ready to advertise it. Quality, we'll see what's happening. But that's sort of like.
That helps, because some of my feedback was gonna be, look, there's like 1,000 things that the technology could be doing. That are, and we online justice, right? So we do online courts, lack of a better way to explain it. And we have tons of information as it relates to why you start something not complete, why do you start filling in forms and not follow through, right? So there's tons of other research that could go into this that might actually be, interacting with this in ways. But it sounds to me like you've got a good path through of a PhD project. But then I would encourage you to think through the actual technology that's deployed, the biased terminology that's used in there, the reality of, all the other things we've already talked about, but your PhD. And to me, jump in, that sounds like a reasonable path that is sequential and seems manageable, and all of those things. I would certainly.
And again, like the institutional portion of it is definitely on the back of my mind. It's just, I don't have the time to do that now,
Yeah.
but that's definitely a tenor project for sure for me. But I really want to get to those mechanisms and understand a little bit more. And to do that, I would need more data. I would need more granular data. I would need more information. Like if I could get that maybe on like daily level, understand like what's going on weekends. Like, because everything that I mentioned about like the judges and on call, that's all anecdotal evidence that I've heard from people, but I heard it over and over again. I haven't tested though, because I don't have the data. If I could have the data on a sort of daily basis, maybe I could be more sure of that and then we could have that finding here. So, but again, requesting data, getting data use agreements with Supreme Courts, it's a little bit of a hassle.
Can I go on this point briefly, or?
Anna, did you have one that you wanted to jump in?
So
So many.
But then we'll bring you to go one or two before we have.
You were hearing that people are more likely to be turned down for a protective order if they go through the form. Do you think that that is something that women know?
I think so.
We talk to each other, and if you know that and say you're less likely to get it granted if you go that route, I think that could be a deterrent for sure. Although it is way easier to sneak into the bathroom and submit it on your phone while he's asleep, get your 3 kids on the bus and get down to the courthouse, et cetera, et cetera. The more ways there are to report, that is a general good to me. But if women are hearing, no matter how true it is, you're less likely to get it granted if you go that route, I think that's a factor. The other thing that I was thinking about with the judges is empathy. I don't, if that's a measurable thing, I don't know, but I feel like similar to how cops tend to be skeptical of what a woman's experience is when they're describing it, what did you do, et cetera. Wondering if judges are more likely to take something seriously if they're hearing it through the language of the police, or they're being reported to it from the police and they're getting this form from some random chick. You know, I don't, not to say that would be a gendered thing, but like there's less human.
But wouldn't you think that like coming from the victim's mouth, so to speak, would drive that empathy? Like that's what I thought at first as well. Instead of coming from a cop.
But if a cop takes it seriously enough that they're gonna write a report and send it out, I think that could legitimize it hugely, because judges tend to believe in the system. They're part of it, right? If a cop says something, a judge is more likely to believe it than if, especially, you know, victims of domestic violence often are of lower socioeconomic, lower education level. They can't express themselves in writing as well at all. They maybe don't know how to describe something, or it could be inflammatory language, because like you said, they are very upset in the moment they're reporting it. And it might sound exaggerated, or it might some kind of language that but I think empathy, because the law is just, it's nothingness. It's their opinion. It's what the judge is feels in their heart. It is. So
Thank you. Yeah, is something you want to do?
Okay, so I know that it's going to be very difficult to find access to the notes, no? So I know, but if you can have it, okay, good. But maybe an intermediate step for a follow project is information of the judges that grants the PO, because that's probably easier. So probably there is some kind of public record that with the name of the judge that signed that PO. So there you can start exploiting something. Again, it's not going to be identification, but gender of the judge, age, blah, blah. You can start finding heterogeneous effects within the same empirical approach even. But now you start maybe getting an idea of what's going on. And then I think you will immediately start identifying if we are talking about biases on the judges, no?
The representation effect, so to speak.
Yes, but because I was thinking, what would be the perfect experiment that you want for the judges, which is very difficult to get, is that it's so blind reports, no? So you get the blind thing, you don't know if it's coming from the police or from the app, and then you need to make a decision. But that's probably almost impossible to get. But at the very least, you can say, okay, when the same judge or type of judge are getting a report from the police and from the app, how they are reacting, no? And that wouldn't require access to the notes, only to the public records on who signed the POs, no? Which is probably public information, no? That must be public information, I assume. So,
Great idea.
Yeah. Two really quick ones from, and then if you'd like to offer any reflections or other questions you have. This won't be our only bite at the apple, which is great, but I did like the research agenda up front. I thought that did a really nice job of kind of couching where you're at, kind of where you're headed. So I would definitely keep that. I don't know if it's useful or not. You could consider like doing a bit of a mapping thing associated with some of those questions, because it wasn't clear to me just if I didn't know anything about you from the outset. If you were just talking about public services in the global south or kind of across the board, if you're interested in doing some comparative work or not. You know, I remember touring with a group of students, the Estonia Center in Tallinn. And they kind of pride themselves as being the global leader in like governmental services, including doing everything online. I mean, voting, reporting, domestic violence, you name it. So if you are interested in doing comparative stuff, like they'd love to talk about what they do, and they have a lot of data. So I mean, I can help you make that connection to it at some point. And the last one is just for the Ostrom stuff. Like one of the early questions I had when I was watching your presentation is just how it connected to the police studies work. And you know, there's just gigantic bibliography that I'm sure you've seen on our website. So I can, if you haven't seen it, I can send it to you, but like as a follow-on project. After you're on the tenure track, like it'd be awesome to like, couch that within this. And there is a police studies, group that we're trying to get going again, a working group. So I mean, if you're interested in being a part of that, that could also be a cool way to engage.
Very much. I appreciate it. Yes. Thank you everyone for your comments and feedback. I'm really passionate about this project and we'll see where it's gonna lead me. Thank you again for the forum to come in.
Thanks for kicking us off so well. Don't forget cookies. So many cookies. For your help with Megan and us. How are you? Yeah, no, it's fine. Yeah, it's quite.
My
Yeah,
name is Jahan.
yeah.
Suspicion that